One of the best and most underrated parts of owning a Switch is the ability to subscribe to the Nintendo Switch Online membership. The subscription provides access to a great lineup of Nintendo games from older consoles, including NES, SNES, Nintendo 64, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. While, with some exceptions, NES and SNES have received most of their major games already, the N64, Game Boy, and GBA libraries are consistently updated with new additions. And it's not just new games that are being added to the service. For the past several years, Nintendo has vastly increased the value of membership by adding functionality for more and more of their past consoles. While NSO launched with just Nintendo Entertainment System games, later consoles were quickly brought into the mix, as the SNES service launched in September of 2019, and the next home console, Nintendo 64, came 2 years later in September of 2021. This 2-year gap between console editions might provide us with a hint toward Nintendo's roadmap for the future of NSO, and perhaps the rest of their development plan will follow this 2-year pattern as well. If that's the case, then this upcoming September of 2023 seems like the time we should expect the long-awaited arrival of GameCube games on Nintendo Switch. Past announcements for NSO console expansions have always taken place during mainline Nintendo Directs, just like the one they're probably going to hold next September. In recent years, Nintendo has almost always held a September Direct. It's one of the most consistently accurate months to predict major Nintendo news, and 2023 will likely be no different. A segment announcing GameCube games for the service, and maybe even a shadow drop akin to the Game Boy announcements last February, would be a massive headline. The GameCube library holds some of the most beloved Nintendo games of all time, and unfortunately, there's still no easy way to play a lot of them on modern hardware. Because of this, physical prices are getting higher and higher, and demand for these games is not going to go away. Recently, Nintendo released one of the highest rated GameCube games on Switch in the form of Metroid Prime Remastered, and this game sold extremely well, moving over 1 million units in just a couple of months. This is all data that supports a not so bold claim. People really want to play their favorite GameCube titles on Nintendo Switch. Arguably, outside of the Game Boy Pokemon games being added, the addition of GameCube games would be the biggest and most exciting news possible for the service. It could mean having easily accessible versions of widely loved games all in a handheld form factor for the very first time. This includes 2 currently unavailable Zelda games and maybe the Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Games never re-released since, like Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and F-Zero GX, iconic GameCube era franchises like Animal Crossing and Pikmin. And if past NSO releases are anything to go off of, we'll get new online multiplayer features added to a lot of these. We're talking online for some of the best Mario Party and Mario Sports games to ever release. How about that Zelda Four Swords Adventures multiplayer that's always been difficult and expensive to play due to the GBA link? I'll also mention Smash, even though I don't really see it happening unless we get the N64 game first. Online implementation for these games could go horribly wrong, especially in the eyes of more competitive players, and that may be why Nintendo's avoiding it, but there's always a chance. Maybe some of this stuff is wishful thinking, but even getting just a few GameCube games to start with the potential for a bigger library in the future would be exciting enough. But at this point in the Switch's life cycle, a certain question always needs to be considered. Isn't new hardware coming soon? What's the point of bringing all this GameCube stuff to Switch if by this time next year, many will have graduated over to a new system? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, and most obviously, the next console could just be a Switch, making the problem irrelevant. It's not out of the question that the next console keeps the same branding and is fully backwards compatible with both physical and digital Switch games, including your NSO library. If this was the case, then we'd keep our Nintendo Switch Online accounts, and it would be a simple system transfer over to the new hardware. quick, easy, and seamless. But even if the next console is not a Switch and something completely new, odds are that interface will still be tied to Nintendo user accounts. This would mean that whatever Nintendo is planning for the future, your existing Nintendo account would simply carry over, hopefully meaning digital eShop purchases and NSO games would travel there as well. We'll keep the same accounts, but Nintendo will rebrand them, adding compatibility for their newest system. So even if the Switch is being phased out, we could continue to enjoy all the games we've already purchased, and the value of the NSO subscription, any future GameCube games included, would continue all the way through the next console generation. But let's say none of this was the case, and we were all forced to start our game libraries from scratch on the next Nintendo console. It would still make sense for Nintendo to support the Switch, as the console would continue to hold immense value due to its exclusive games and already established player base. Historically, especially with their handhelds, Nintendo tends to introduce new hardware as a separate pillar at first, continuing to support the older system for an extended period of time post-launch. We were getting new Nintendo 3DS games all the way into 2019, and its eShop remained active until earlier this year. Before that, Nintendo was adamant that the DS wouldn't replace the Game Boy line, but would be a completely new third pillar standing beside GBA and GameCube. With the huge success of the Switch, seeing this type of strategy from Nintendo again seems even more likely. With a new hardware launch, they're not going to want to alienate the large existing Switch user base. So regardless of what's coming next, it's just about guaranteed that the current model will be supported for at least a few years to follow. That means GameCube on Switch this September is a go, whether we get new hardware a year from now or much further down the line. Let's say the earliest we get new Nintendo hardware is spring 2024, as recent comments from President Furukawa seem to suggest. Then, even an early March hardware release would still mean we have a good 6 months to enjoy NSO GameCube games on the current platform before we have to start thinking about sending the console off into the sunset. So all this to say, expecting GameCube games to hit Switch this fall is not out of the question. It actually makes a lot of sense for Nintendo to do it sooner rather than later. Lately, I've been loving the game drops on NSO. They're a great excuse to dive back into some classics from Nintendo history. We just got the rest of the Super Mario Advance series announced for GBA, and with stuff like Pokemon Stadium 2 and Golden Sun coming soon, we already know about some nice little bonuses for NSO subscribers to look forward to. Adding GameCube into the mix would no doubt be exciting, and would do a lot to make those who haven't been paying for the expansion pack to consider it more highly. But what do you think? Is there a chance GameCube games arrive on Switch later this year? Which titles would you like to see added to the service? Personally, I'd love to see Mario Kart Double Dash and Mario Party 4 through 7 given online play. I'd also enjoy finally experiencing Four Swords Adventures multiplayer properly after all this time. An affordable way to play Fire Emblem Path of Radiance would be great too. And of course, those two GameCube Zeldas need to get to Switch in some form, making it so every 3D Zelda game would be playable on the console. How cool would that be? Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks as always for watching.